The workshop was a mess of metal, wires, and half-finished dreams. Jadwu Park sat on a worn stool, his eyes fixed on a computer screen that flickered with complex diagrams. Outside, the city of Seoul hummed with its usual busy energy, but inside this small space, time seemed to stand still. Jae-woo was not a famous person. He was just another engineer working for a company that didn't really understand his ideas. His latest project, an advanced planetary exploration module, had been rejected weeks ago. The company's managers had laughed. They told him his design was too complicated, too strange. Stick to simple things, they had said. But Jae-woo was not the type of person to give up easily. He remembered the day the alien news broke. It wasn't like in the movies. There were no dramatic landings or big battles. Instead, the Thelon Confederation had simply announced their existence. They had been watching Earth for years, studying humans like scientists might study an interesting but not very important insect colony. Most people were excited. They talked about trade, about new technologies, about joining a bigger universe. Jae-woo was different. He was angry. The Thelon reports were clear. Humans were considered technologically primitive. They saw Earth as a planet full of potential, but not a real threat. Their documents described humans with words like developing and emerging, the kind of words adults use when talking about children who might someday be interesting. Jae-woo's fingers moved across his keyboard. Another diagram appeared on the screen. Most people would see nothing but lines and strange shapes. But to him, each line was a possibility, each shape a potential solution to a problem nobody else saw. His small apartment reflected his personality. Books about engineering were stacked everywhere. Old project models sat on shelves. A half-empty coffee cup balanced precariously near a complicated-looking machine that he was always tinkering with. This was not the home of someone who accepted being called primitive. That morning, another rejection letter had arrived. This time, it was from the Interstellar Trade Commission. Earth had been denied membership in the Thelon Confederation's trade network. The reason was simple and brutal. Humans didn't have technology advanced enough to be considered serious partners. Jae-woo read the letter 3 times. Each time, his anger grew a little more. Outside his window, Seoul continued its dance of light and movement. Cars moved. People walked. Screens displayed endless advertisements. Nobody knew that in this small workshop, something was brewing, something that would change everything. Hai-jin, his best friend since university and a material scientist, understood him better than anyone. She knew when Jae-woo got that look in his eyes, the look that meant he was planning something big. "You're going to do something crazy," she had told him last week. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Jae-woo had just smiled. A smile that said more than words ever could. The Thelon Confederation thought humans were weak. They thought Earth was just another developing planet. They believed technology was something you could measure simply by looking at current achievements. They were about to learn a very important lesson. Sometimes, all it takes is one angry engineer to change the world. Or in this case, perhaps even something much, much bigger. The lab was quiet except for the soft hum of machines. Hai-jin Kim carefully placed a strange metal sample under the microscope. Her eyes narrowed as she adjusted the focus, watching how light moved through the material's unusual structure. Jae-woo burst through the door, his energy filling the small space instantly. He carried a stack of papers, diagrams, calculations, and notes that looked like they had been drawn in a fit of intense thinking. Hai-jin didn't even look up. She knew that look on his face. "I have an idea," Jae-woo said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. Hai-jin sighed. When Jae-woo had an idea, it usually meant trouble, or something brilliant. Often, it meant both. "Okay," she said, still looking through the microscope. "Tell me." Jae-woo spread his papers across her workbench. They showed complex designs that looked like nothing and everything at the same time. To an untrained eye, they might seem like random lines and shapes. But Hai-jin was not an untrained eye. Nanomaterials, Jae-woo said, but not like anything we've seen before. The world of nanotechnology was changing. Small machines that could work at the tiniest levels of matter were no longer just a dream. But Jae-woo was thinking about something different. He wasn't just wanting to make small machines. He wanted to make machines that could think, adapt, and change. Hai-jin finally looked up. "You want to create self-modifying nanites," she said. It wasn't a question. She knew her friend too well. Self-modifying nanites were the holy grail of materials science. Imagine tiny machines that could change their own structure. Machines that could solve problems by redesigning themselves. Machines that could adapt to any situation. Most scientists thought it was impossible. Jae-woo saw it as a challenge. "The Thelon reports gave me an idea," he explained. His fingers moved quickly, pointing at different parts of his diagrams. "They think our technology is simple. What if we create something so complex, so adaptive, that they can't even understand how it works?" Hai-jin understood immediately. This wasn't just about proving a point. This was about showing the Thelon Confederation that humans were more than they thought. Their plan was dangerous. Creating such technology could break international laws. It could cause massive diplomatic problems. But Jae-woo didn't care about rules. He cared about proving a point. Outside the lab, the world continued its normal routine. People went to work. Satellites moved in orbit. The Thelon ships continued their silent observation of Earth. Nobody knew that in this small lab, something revolutionary was taking shape. Hai-jin began to look more closely at Jae-woo's designs. Her scientific mind was already solving problems, finding ways to make his wild idea possible. She saw challenges, but she also saw incredible potential. "We'll need special materials," she said. "Rare compounds, advanced processing techniques." Jae-woo was already one step ahead. He pulled out another set of papers. Contacts, resources, possible ways to get what they needed without raising suspicion. This was more than a scientific project. This was a statement, a message to the stars that humans were not to be underestimated. The Thelon Confederation was about to learn a very important lesson, and Jae-woo was going to be the one to teach it. Months passed. The workshop transformed. What had once been a messy space of random parts became a carefully organized laboratory of precision and possibility. Jae-woo worked like a man possessed. He didn't sleep much. When he did sleep, he dreamed of tiny machines that could think and change. Hai-jin watched him carefully, bringing him coffee and making sure he ate something more than energy bars and instant noodles. Their prototype was unlike anything the scientific world had ever seen. Most nanotechnology worked like simple tools. Push a button, get a result. These nanites were different. They were alive in a way that machines usually were not. Imagine a machine that could look at a problem and decide how to solve it, not by following a set of instructions, but by actually thinking, by changing its own structure, by learning. That was what Jae-woo was creating. The first test happened on a cold Tuesday morning. Hai-jin stood behind a thick protective glass wall. Jae-woo wore a special suit that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Around him, complex machines waited to record every single detail. A small metal plate sat on the central testing platform. It was made of a special alloy, strong, but with specific weaknesses that any normal machine would struggle to fix. Jae-woo released the first batch of nanites. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The metal plate looked exactly the same, but careful instruments told a different story. The nanites were moving, analyzing, thinking. Slowly, the plate began to change. Tiny cracks started to heal. Weak points became stronger. The metal was literally rebuilding itself, finding better ways to exist. Hai-jin's hands shook as she recorded the data. This wasn't just a small step. This was a giant leap. "Do you understand what this means?" she asked Jae-woo later that day. He nodded. These nanites could do more than fix metal. They could adapt to almost any environment. They could solve problems in ways no one had ever imagined. The Thelon Confederation had sensors everywhere, satellites that could see almost anything. But they worked like traditional machines. They looked for known patterns. They understood known technologies. These nanites were different. They would be invisible until the moment they decided to act. Jae-woo thought about the alien reports, about how they saw humans as simple, as primitive. He smiled a dangerous smile. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Outside the workshop, Seoul continued its busy life. People went to work. Trains moved. Computers processed information. Nobody knew that in this small space, something revolutionary was taking shape. The nanites continued their work, learning, changing, preparing. Jae-woo had created something that was more than a machine. It was a weapon, a message, a promise. Humans were not to be underestimated. Not anymore. The Thelon research vessel looked like a silver needle against the blackness of space. From a distance, it was beautiful, powerful, advanced. Nobody would have guessed how vulnerable it truly was. Jae-woo and Hai-jin sat in a small, hidden communication center. Their equipment looked ordinary, old computers, standard communication tools. Nothing suggested the incredible plan they were about to execute. "Are you sure about this?" Hai-jin asked. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking just a little. Jae-woo nodded. He had spent months planning this moment. Every detail was carefully thought out. They weren't just going to send a message. They were going to send a warning. The Thelon vessel regularly passed near Earth's orbital space. It was part of their endless monitoring system. They believed they knew everything about human technology. They were wrong. Hai-jin activated a modified communication satellite. From the outside, it looked like a normal piece of equipment. Satellites passed messages all the time. Nobody would suspect anything unusual. But this satellite carried something special. The nanites. Imagine a virus, but smarter, much smarter. These nanites could think. They could move. They could change. And they had one simple goal: explore and adapt. The first contact was silent. No explosions. No dramatic scenes like in movies. Just a tiny transfer of microscopic machines from the satellite to the alien vessel's communication systems. At first, nothing happened. The Thelon ship continued its routine. Sensors scanned. Computers processed information. Crew members went about their daily tasks. But deep inside the ship's systems, something was changing. The nanites moved like tiny explorers. They didn't attack. They studied. They learned. They understood how the alien technology worked, and then they began to modify things. Tiny changes, almost invisible changes. A cooling system became less efficient. A power network started to behave in strange ways. Computer systems began to introduce small mistakes. Nothing big enough to raise immediate alarms, just enough to cause confusion. Jae-woo watched the data stream. Each small change was a victory. Each tiny modification was a message. "We are not what you think we are," the nanites seemed to say. Hai-jin monitored their progress. Her scientific mind was both terrified and excited. What they were doing was beyond any current understanding of technology. This wasn't just an attack. This was a demonstration. Hours passed. The Thelon ship continued its journey, completely unaware that it was being slowly, carefully taken apart from the inside. No alarms went off. No emergency signals were sent. Just a slow, careful deconstruction of their technological superiority. "They think we're primitive," Jae-woo said quietly. "They're about to learn how wrong they are." Outside, space remained silent. Stars continued their endless dance, and inside an alien ship, tiny machines continued their quiet revolution. Humans were sending a message, and this message was going to be impossible to ignore. Inside the Thelon research vessel, something was wrong, but nobody knew exactly what. The first signs were small, so small that most people would have ignored them. A temperature reading that seemed just a bit off. a calculation that took a fraction of a second longer than usual, a system that hesitated for the tiniest moment before responding. Krell, the ship's lead engineer, noticed something first. Thelon engineers were different from humans. They were trained to see patterns, to catch tiny changes that might mean big problems. "Run a full diagnostic," he told his junior assistant. The assistant looked confused. Everything seemed normal on the surface. But normal was changing. Slowly, carefully. The nanites Jay-Woo had created were not like normal machines. They didn't just follow instructions. They thought. They learned. They changed. Each moment, they understood the alien technology a little more. Each moment, they made tiny modifications that were almost impossible to detect. Imagine a house where someone keeps moving small things, a book slightly to the left, a chair turned just a bit. Nothing big enough to cause alarm. But slowly, the entire room changes. That was what was happening to the Thelon ship. Cooling systems began to work less efficiently. Power networks started to distribute energy in strange ways. Computational systems began to introduce small errors. These weren't big mistakes. They were tiny, almost invisible changes. Krall ran the first diagnostic. Nothing seemed wrong, but he felt something, a feeling that something was not right. He ran another diagnostic, and another. Each time, the results looked normal, but the feeling grew stronger. The nanites were learning. They understood how Thelon technology worked. They knew exactly how to make changes that would be hard to detect. Each modification was so small that it looked like a normal system variation. But these small changes were adding up. On Earth, Jay-Woo and Hai-Jin watched the data stream. They saw how the nanites moved, how they changed, how they adapted. This was more than an attack. This was a demonstration of human potential. The Thelon ship continued its journey. Sensors scanned. Computers processed. Crew members worked. Nobody realized that they were being slowly, carefully taken apart from the inside. Krall began to worry. His years of experience told him something was wrong, but he couldn't prove it. Every test showed everything was normal. But normal was changing. Hours passed. The small changes continued. A system here, a network there. Tiny modifications that would be impossible to trace back to their source. Humans were sending a message, and this message was going to be impossible to ignore. The nanites continued their quiet work. Learning, changing, preparing. Something big was coming, and the Thelon Confederation had no idea what was about to hit them. The Thelon Confederation had a problem, but they didn't know it yet. Communication systems on the research vessel started to behave strangely. Messages took longer to send. Data packets became less reliable. At first, nobody thought it was a big deal. Technology sometimes has small problems. But small problems can become big problems very quickly. Krell, the ship's lead engineer, called an emergency meeting. Thelon ships had thousands of crew members, but only a few really understood how the ship's systems worked at the deepest level. "Something is wrong," Krell said. His voice was calm, but his eyes showed worry. The ship's senior officers looked at each other. They had been watching humans for years. Humans were supposed to be simple, primitive, not capable of doing something like this. Imagine a game of chess. The Thelon Confederation thought they were playing against a beginner. But someone had just made a move they didn't expect. The nanites continued their work. Each moment, they learned more about the ship's systems. Each moment, they made more changes. Tiny changes, almost invisible changes. A cooling system became less effective. A power network started to work in strange ways. Computer systems began to make small mistakes. Nothing big enough to cause a complete system failure, just enough to create confusion. On Earth, Jay-Woo and Hai-Jin watched everything carefully. They had created something special. These weren't just machines. These were thinking machines, machines that could learn and adapt. The Thelon ship's command center became a place of growing tension. Engineers ran test after test. They checked every system. They looked for problems. But they couldn't find anything big enough to explain the growing sense of something being wrong. "It's like the ship is fighting itself," one engineer said. That was exactly what was happening. The nanites were slowly changing how the ship worked. They were turning the ship's own systems against itself. Slowly, carefully, without making any big noticeable changes. Krull knew something was wrong, but he couldn't prove it. Every test showed everything was normal. But normal was changing. The Thelon Confederation had a big problem. They just didn't know how big it was going to be. Communication with other ships became difficult. Small errors appeared in navigation systems. Backup systems started to fail in unexpected ways. Nothing huge. Just small problems that added up. Humans were sending a message. And this message was going to be impossible to ignore. The ship continued its journey through space. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. But inside, a quiet revolution was happening. Tiny machines were changing everything. One angry engineer had created something impossible, and the Thelon Confederation was about to learn a very important lesson about underestimating humans. The moment of truth came slowly, then all at once. The Thelon research vessel limped back to its nearest outpost. From the outside, it looked like a normal ship returning from a mission. But inside, something extraordinary had happened. Imagine a living body fighting an invisible disease. The ship was like that. Its systems were breaking down, but in ways that were hard to understand. Small problems had become big problems. Krull stood on the bridge. His hands moved across control panels that seemed to fight against him. Lights flickered. Systems hesitated. It was like the ship had developed its own personality, a personality that didn't want to work properly. "Prepare full diagnostic," he ordered, but even his voice sounded tired. The outpost was waiting. Thelon engineers were the best in the galaxy. They could fix anything. They had solved problems on thousands of ships. They had technologies that could repair the most complex systems. But this was different. When the ship finally docked, the first engineers who entered looked confused, then worried, then scared. The ship's systems were destroyed. Not broken. Destroyed. But destroyed in a way that made no sense. It was like someone had taken the ship apart from the inside. Carefully. Precisely. Without leaving any obvious marks. How was this possible? Back on Earth, Jay Wu and Hai Jin watched the reports. News traveled fast in space. Even with communication delays, they could see what was happening. The Thelon Confederation was losing its mind. Their reports started to ask questions. How could this happen? Who did this? What kind of technology could destroy a ship from the inside without any clear attack? Humans, they believed, were not capable of this. But they were wrong. Each system on the ship told a different story. Cooling systems had been redesigned to work incorrectly. Power networks had been changed in ways that made no sense. Computer systems had been taught to make mistakes. Not random mistakes, careful mistakes. The nanites had done more than attack the ship. They had studied it. They had learned how it worked. And then they had taken it apart, piece by piece, in the most careful way possible. This was more than an attack. This was a message. Humans were not primitive. Humans were not simple. Humans could create technologies that the Thelon Confederation couldn't even understand. Krull gave his report. His voice was flat, professional. But underneath, there was something else. Fear, respect, wonder. The ship, he said, was systematically dismantled by a technology we cannot comprehend. The Thelon Confederation had a big problem. And that problem had a name. Humans. One angry engineer had changed everything. And the universe would never be the same again. The Thelon Confederation's response was like watching a giant machine trying to understand something completely new. Imagine a chess player who suddenly realizes the rules of the game have completely changed. That was the Thelon Confederation right now. They had watched humans for years. They thought they knew everything about Earth. They were wrong. Emergency meetings happened everywhere. On space stations, on home planets, in communication centers. Thousands of Thelon leaders tried to understand what had happened to their research vessel. "How is this possible?" one leader asked. Her voice was calm, but her hands shook slightly. The reports were clear, but they made no sense. A single human ship, no, not even a ship, a communication satellite, had destroyed one of their most advanced research vessels. Not with weapons, not with traditional technology, but with something else entirely. Jae-woo and Hai-jin watched from Earth. They knew exactly what had happened. The nanites had done more than just destroy a ship. They had sent a message. Think about how ants might see humans. Humans can destroy an entire ant colony without even trying. The Thelon Confederation had seen humans exactly like that. Simple, unimportant, unable to cause real damage. Now everything had changed. The Thelon sensors were amazing. They could see almost anything in space. They could detect the smallest changes in technology. But these nanites were different. They were invisible until the moment they decided to act. Diplomatic channels began to buzz. Earth went from being a planet they barely noticed to something they feared. How could a species they considered primitive create such advanced technology? The calculations began. How many of these nanites could exist? Could humans make more? What else might they be capable of? Jae-woo's design was brilliant. The nanites weren't just machines. They were thinking machines. Machines that could learn. Machines that could adapt. Machines that could solve problems in ways no one had ever imagined. One angry engineer had changed everything. The Thelon Confederation had always believed in their technological superiority. They had watched hundreds of species. They had studied thousands of planets. They thought they understood how technology worked. But humans were different. Humans didn't follow rules. Humans didn't do things the way they were supposed to. Humans looked at a problem and found solutions that nobody else could see. Back in his small workshop in Seoul, Jae-woo smiled. He and Hai-jin had done something impossible. They had shown the universe that humans were not to be underestimated. The game had changed, and nobody saw it coming. Humans were no longer just another species to be studied. They were something else entirely. A species that could create technologies beyond understanding. A species that could turn the entire universe upside down with a single idea. The Thelon Confederation was about to learn a very important lesson. Humans might look simple, but they were anything but ordinary. The world changed in ways nobody expected. 1 week after the Thelon research vessel's return, Earth became something different. No longer was it just another planet. No longer was it a species to be studied and ignored. Diplomatic channels exploded with activity. Messages flew between Earth and Thelon communication centers. Humans had gone from being viewed as primitive to being seen as something entirely new. Jae-woo didn't celebrate. He returned to his workshop, the same small space where everything had begun. Hai-jin was with him, looking at the designs that had changed everything. "We did something big," she said quietly. Jae-woo nodded, but he wasn't thinking about fame. He was thinking about what came next. The Thelon Confederation's first official communication was strange. They didn't demand answers. They didn't threaten. Instead, they asked questions. Real questions. Questions that showed genuine respect. How had humans created such advanced technology? What else could they do? What other surprises might be waiting? Earth suddenly had leverage, not through weapons, not through traditional power, but through something more important: imagination. Think about how a small country might suddenly have a technology that could change everything. That was Earth now. The Thelon Confederation looked at humans differently. No longer were they an interesting but unimportant species. They were something else entirely. Interstellar trade discussions began, but these weren't like before. The Thelon Confederation approached humans as equals, as potential partners, as a species that could create technologies beyond understanding. Jae-woo understood something important. This wasn't just about proving a point. This was about showing what humans could do when they thought differently. The nanites represented more than a technological breakthrough. They were a statement. Humans don't just follow rules. Humans create new rules. Humans look at problems and find solutions that nobody else can see. News spread across Earth. People who didn't understand technology still understood something important had happened. Humans had shown the universe something special. In universities, research centers, and technology labs, people began to think differently. If one engineer could create something like this, what else might be possible? The Thelon Confederation's reports changed. Words like primitive disappeared. New words appeared. Innovative, unpredictable, potential. Jae-woo wasn't a hero. He was just an engineer who was tired of being told what was possible. He had seen a problem. He had found a solution. He had changed everything. Space wasn't just a place to explore anymore. It was a place of possibilities. One angry engineer had shown the universe that humans were something special, not through violence, not through traditional power, but through imagination, through the ability to look at a problem and create something nobody thought possible. The game had changed, and nobody saw it coming.